Kash Patel, a name once tied to the corridors of power, was suddenly hit with a devastating verdict, a $500 million fine. No proper trial, no chance to defend himself, no opportunity to speak. The sentence was handed down by a judge who believed Patel would stay silent, would bow his head. But something no one expected happened. Patel didn't just fight back, he exposed a government conspiracy concealed for years, a system so rotten that even the judge who sentenced him broke down, in tears before undeniable truth. What he revealed left the entire courtroom speechless, not through anger, not through rallying cries, but through truth, evidence, and the courage of a man who knew the cost of silence was far greater than the cost of resistance. And then a question echoed, shaking the nation. If this could happen to Kash Patel, a former FBI director, who among us can truly believe they're protected by the law? That courtroom confrontation wasn't just a trial. It was a crack in the wall of power, the beginning of the collapse of what was built on lies. It all began on a bone-chilling morning at the Washington, D.C. federal courthouse. Inside, the air was thick, heavy enough to feel in every breath. Every seat was filled, the hallways packed with cameras, reporters, and tense faces awaiting a historic moment. Not an ordinary failure, but the public downfall of an FBI director who dared to do what no one else would, challenge the order, expose power, and refuse to bend to the unwritten rules of the elite. The murmurs in the room faded as the heavy double doors let out a long creak. Judge Robert Marshall appeared, his black robe trailing to his ankles, steps firm, eyes sharp as a cold blade, lips pressed tight. Without a word, he didn't glance at the crowd. Not a single nod. Just a shadow of authority stepping onto the bench, carrying the weight of the entire U.S. legal system. And in that moment, all of Washington fell silent. At the defendant's table, Kash Patel sat upright, hands clasped, his gaze locked on the judge's seat with unwavering resolve. His gray suit was simple, but his presence commanded every eye in the room. He didn't flinch as Judge Marshall raised the gavel, adjusted his glasses, and began. The crowd leaned forward, tense with anticipation. Then, the gavel struck like thunder in a clear sky. The court finds the defendant, FBI Director Kash Patel, guilty of intentionally deceiving federal agencies and misusing funds from the Executive Transparency Program, a national security reform initiative. The severity of the violation is grave, the damage extensive. Therefore, the court imposes a civil penalty of $500 million to be paid within 90 days. The room went dead silent, then erupted in gasps. No one could suppress it. Some turned to each other, eyes wide with disbelief, as if to confirm they hadn't misheard. $500 million, a sum beyond imagination, larger than the GDP of some small nations. Camera flashes lit up like a lightning storm. Reporters scribbled furiously, as if recording a moment destined for history books. Even the court stenographer paused, hesitant. But Kash Patel didn't move. He sat still as stone, no blink, no twitch of the lips. Only the steady rise and fall of his chest betrayed the weight on his shoulders. He glanced briefly at his lawyer, giving a slight nod, not of a defeated man, but of someone who hadn't yet spoken his final word. "This isn't over," his eyes seemed to say. Judge Robert Marshall, his face cold as steel, said nothing more. He struck the gavel again, a dry crack, and called for a recess. But in that moment, as the echo of the gavel lingered, the story had already escaped the courtroom's four walls. People believed a hero had fallen, or at least they thought so. Before becoming FBI director, Kash Patel had walked into courtrooms with just a file in hand and cheap gas station coffee. A former Justice Department lawyer, he didn't come from wealth or fame. He came from resilience, from truth, from tireless days defending the ideals he believed in. His memory was steadfast. Early in his career, he'd rushed to a televised legal debate that would shape his reputation as a razor-sharp thinker, only for his car to run out of gas 2 blocks from the studio. Instead of panicking, he sprinted to the set, arriving with 30 seconds to spare, and still won. His steely composure led an opponent to call him a storm in a suit. Patel had chuckled at the nickname, but the phrase haunted him for years. He built his reputation not by begging for recognition, but by taking on cases no one else dared touch. Abuse of power in government agencies, corruption in the intelligence system, conspiracies to bury the truth by the powerful. He didn't schmooze at DC cocktail parties. He made his mark in public speeches, directly attacking those he called the deep state. When he became FBI director, it wasn't because the system chose him. It was because he refused to be sidelined. So when the courtroom expected him to crumble under the $500 million fine, they didn't know Kash Patel, the man who once quoted Reagan before a hostile committee, who kept an old memo about the deep state on his desk as a reminder. They hadn't met the man who entered every battle ready to lose everything, except his honor. The prosecutors unraveling, the media swarmed like vultures, each outlet hunting for the most sensational angle. Headlines were written before the trial ended. Conservative star exposed, abuse of power or cover-up. Patel's downfall, the end of a political career. Outside the courtroom, commentators predicted his ruin. Inside, whispers slithered through the benches. He's done. Arrogant, corrupt, like the rest. But no one knew the truth. And then there was Michael Stone, the federal prosecutor with a flair for theatrics, perfect suit, smug smile, and a voice that made every word sound like gospel. To the public, he was the hero, the one who'd take down yet another corrupt politician. Michael stood across the courtroom like a hunter ready to claim his prize. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the prize he targeted wasn't prey. This wasn't just a trial. It was a trap. A trap the system had perfected over decades. Pick a tough conservative figure, smear their reputation. Wait for the crowd to cheer as they fall. But this time they'd chosen the wrong man, because Kash Patel didn't come to court to surrender. He came to burn down the lies and walk through the smoke still standing. The envelope that shattered. The system. The courtroom hadn't even processed the $500 million fine when Patel leaned slightly to his left. His eyes stayed forward, his face expressionless, but his voice, just loud enough to be heard, reached his lead attorney, Sarah Langston, like a match striking a gas can. Show them what they don't want to see. The microphone near the defense table barely caught the words. Sarah didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't show shock. Instead, she calmly pulled a thick, worn manila envelope from under the table. Her movements were poised, not begging for attention, but naturally drawing every eye in the room. It was cinematic. Like a magician's final act after convincing the audience the show was over. In the press section, reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Pens hovered. The already suffocating air tightened further. A few heads tilted. Even Judge Robert Marshall, his face carved from stone, leaned forward slightly. One eyebrow lifted in silent curiosity. He said nothing, but the unspoken command was clear. Proceed. Sarah stood slowly, smoothing her jacket before stepping forward. Her steps weren't rushed. The envelope was held like a Bible. She didn't slam it down, didn't overplay the moment. She simply placed it before Judge Marshall and said, "Your Honor, before any penalty is enforced, the defense respectfully requests the court's permission to present new evidence. Evidence we believe will fundamentally alter the basis of this case." Marshall, skeptical by nature, narrowed his eyes. "Miss Langston, the time for presenting. Evidence has passed. The court has ruled." What could justify this interruption? Her response was a dagger. "Because, Your Honor, this evidence was deliberately withheld from us. We received it 3 days ago, from a whistleblower within the Justice Department. The fallout." The words shattered the air. Gasps echoed like startled birds. Reporters stood instinctively. Michael Stone's smug smile vanished, his confidence melting like wax from a dying candle. Judge Marshall didn't touch the envelope at first. He studied Sarah, searching for deception. He found none. Slowly, he opened it. Inside, a stack of damning documents. The first page was a memo from the Justice Department's internal audit team, drafted months before Patel was charged. It concluded that the irregularities tied to the Executive Transparency Program were software glitches, not fraud, not Patel's fault. The next page? A chain of internal DOJ emails, One read, "We reviewed the audit. There's no clear evidence Patel intentionally misled anyone. Pursuing this case could trigger political backlash." Another suggested, "Delay releasing the findings. Optics are paramount." The courtroom froze. Even the clerk stood motionless. Judge Marshall's hands gripped the documents. His composure unraveled with each page. These weren't allegations, they were proof. The reckoning. The silence was deafening, the kind that only comes when everyone realizes they're witnessing history. Across the aisle, Michael Stone looked like he might disintegrate. His colleagues stared blankly. Their case wasn't collapsing, it was evaporating. Patel didn't move. He didn't need to. For the first time that morning, he wasn't the one on trial. The system was. And for the first time in decades, Judge Robert Marshall, the unshakable pillar of the bench, looked like a man struggling not to drown.